The register drawer snapped open with a heavy clang, a sound that cut through the gentle murmur of breakfast conversations. A trembling hand reached in and pulled out a bill, and in that single moment, the air changed. Heads turned. Conversations paused, and all eyes found Margaret. Margaret, who for years had been the beating heart of Riverside Diner, now stood in silence, her back slightly hunched, her face unreadable. A ripple passed through the room, like a gust of cold wind under a closed door. "She's not the same anymore," someone whispered, and it stuck to the walls like a shadow. A young waitress, voice tight and nervous, leaned in, whispering just loud enough for others to hear. I saw her slip something into her pocket, and then came Victor, the manager, standing tall in the doorway, half cloaked in shadow. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried judgment like a gavel hitting wood. "One more mistake and I'm calling the police." From behind the counter, Jackson listened. His chest tightened as the voices grew louder, the assumptions sharper. The word thief hung in the air, not yet spoken aloud, but already taking shape on people's tongues. His jaw clenched, not out of anger, but disbelief. Trust doesn't vanish in a moment. It crumbles slowly, then all at once. And if Margaret really had fallen, Jackson had to see it with his own eyes. So, the owner made a choice that would change everything. He would disguise himself and work among his staff. For 10 years, Margaret wasn't just another waitress. She was the morning smile that unlocked the diner before sunrise. She was the warmth in the first cup of coffee and the calm in the storm of a lunch rush. Every day began with her voice, gentle, grounded, unwavering. She greeted strangers like old friends and made regulars feel like they'd come home. Margaret remembered everything. Not just orders, but moments. Mr. Holloway's tea without sugar, the Whitford kids' pancakes, extra blueberries, anniversaries, graduations, a new puppy mentioned once and never forgotten. Her care wasn't grand. It was subtle, tender. The kind of presence that wrapped itself around people quietly. Children ran to her before their parents even chose a table. She knelt to their level, past them, a smiley face drawn on a napkin, a cookie in a napkin. Their laughter was always her first tip of the day. Regulars requested her section, not because she was faster, though she was, but because she made them feel safe. There was a steadiness to her, an emotional anchor. Her trays never wobbled. Orders were perfect. Even the managers, who came and went like the seasons, learned quickly. Margaret was the one who held the place together. She trained the new hires, mostly teenagers trembling in their too big uniforms, eyes wide with doubt. By the time they clocked out, they'd all say the same thing. Margaret taught me how to care. The staff called her their compass, the regulars their reason to return. And Jackson, quietly watching from behind the scenes, called her something else entirely. The soul of Riverside. For a decade, she was flawless. But flawless things, when cracked, cut deeper than anyone expects. Ask Mrs. Holloway. She's walked through the doors of Riverside nearly every morning for 10 years. Not once did Margaret get her tea wrong, not a spoonful of sugar out of place. 10 years, she says, shaking her head. And not a single mistake. To Mrs. Holloway, Margaret wasn't a server. She was the rhythm of her morning, her first breath of comfort before the world's noise began, and children knew her too. They lit up the moment she appeared, arms waving, eyes wide with anticipation. She bent down, winked, and like magic, there was a cookie in their hands, a napkin with a smiley face. The whole room seemed to breathe lighter when Margaret was there, like she carried sunlight in her apron pocket. The Whitfords, A family spanning 3 generations always requested her counter. She remembered everything. The grandfather's long-winded stories, the mother's favorite pie, the youngest's math exam from last spring. She'd lean close and ask, "How'd it go?" And then she'd listen, really listen, like she had nowhere else to be. Her presence wove itself into the restaurant's very structure. She made Riverside more than a place to eat. She turned it into a second home. Conversation softened when she walked by. Customers spoke slower, more gently, unconsciously matching her pace. People came for pancakes but stayed for belonging. They found something they hadn't even known they were missing, and they tied that feeling to Margaret. They called her family, though there was no blood. They called her home, though her name wasn't on their mailbox. So when the whispers began, when doubt crept in, they didn't just question her. They questioned the very foundation of what they believed Riverside to be. Simon Kels remembers his first shift, 19 years old. Nervous, clumsy. Every tray he carried felt like a potential disaster. A spilled coffee felt like the end of the world, and the glares from impatient customers like daggers. Then came Margaret. No scolding, no impatience, just a kind smile and a whisper. Think of them as family. Serve them like you'd serve your own. Simple words, but they unlocked something deep. Simon stopped seeing strangers. He saw uncles, mothers, children. The restaurant transformed from battlefield to sanctuary. Others had stories too. Elena, one of the newer servers, was once found crying in the stockroom. It was Margaret who found her, and Margaret who stayed. Not with empty platitudes, but with a soft reminder. You'll make mistakes. That's how you learn. Mistakes are just lessons with sharp edges. To the staff, Margaret wasn't a co-worker. She was a guide. She taught them not just how to carry plates, but how to carry grace. She was like an older sister to the team, the one they leaned on before ever thinking about asking the manager. There was an unspoken conviction among them that as long as Margaret stood behind the counter, Riverside could not crumble. In many ways, she carried the weight of the restaurant on her shoulders. In quiet actions, unseen moments, none of it written in the handbook. That's why the admiration felt for her wasn't shallow praise. It ran deeper, rooted in the gratitude for the strength she offered to those who nearly quit before starting. So when whispers began that Margaret might be stealing, Simon felt it like a personal betrayal, not from her, but from the voices daring to accuse the woman who had once carried them all. Jackson held on to a memory that remained seared into his mind even 10 years later. He remembered the grand opening of Riverside, the day he had carried in his heart for half his life. The dining room was packed, the air thick with anticipation, orders bouncing between trays, dishes clattering in rhythm with chaos. Then it happened. One customer, red-faced and furious, thudded his hand on the counter. His food was late, and patience had snapped. His voice boomed, silencing the diner in an instant. Jackson froze behind the kitchen door, heart pounding like an alarm. The staff froze too intimidated to act. The promise of Riverside, and everything Jackson had poured into it, hung by a fraying thread. And in that moment, Margaret moved forward, not with fear, not with panic, but with the kind of calm assurance that seemed preordained. She approached the table, voice steady and low, placing a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. No defensiveness. She listened. Truly listened, while everyone else had been too busy defending or excusing. Within minutes, the storm softened. She delivered his meal herself, offered a quiet apology, and vowed the kitchen would never forget his preference again. By the time she left, He was smiling. He tipped generously, head shaking as if embarrassed by his own outburst. The tension in the room loosened. What could have been disaster became renewed trust. Jackson watched from the corner, stunned. One woman's grace had saved the day. The restaurant inhaled again, exhaling relief. That night, once the last customer had left and the lights were dim, Jackson lingered in the empty dining room, silently thanking her. He realized then, Riverside wasn't just bricks and tables. It was people, and Margaret, more than anyone, embodied its heart and soul. For years she had walked in her own shadow of perfection. Customers learned not to double-check their orders because she never forgot a detail. Not a spoon of sugar misplaced, not a plate misdelivered. That precision was Margaret's gift, the reason everyone trusted her. That's also why her first mistakes, although small, felt so unsettling. One morning, she brought the wrong sandwich to a regular who had ordered the same meal for 10 years. The man laughed it off initially, but his puzzled glance lingered. Later, a family flagged for napkins that never arrived. They whispered among themselves, "That's not like her." A single oversight, seemingly harmless, yet each added weight. Then came the missed drink, a dish delivered to the wrong table. Each time she apologized, a flush colored her cheeks, something no one had ever seen before. She, the woman who once glided through chaos like a conductor leading an orchestra, now seemed unsteady on the simplest notes. Victor Raines started noting every complaint, delay, sigh of frustration. His reports landed on Jackson's desk like cold stones, each one chipping at his confidence. He told himself they were exaggerations, misunderstandings. Margaret couldn't suddenly become careless, yet the notes kept coming. Worse, Jackson began to see it himself. From his vantage, he watched Margaret check and recheck an order slip, as though she no longer trusted her own memory. He saw her linger over the register, hesitating before summoning the courage to move forward. The contrast was painful. The same woman who once quelled the worst customer anger with a single word now seemed distant, fragile. Jackson tried to silence the doubt rising within him, but every day it pressed harder. What was happening to Margaret? Rumors spread like smoke, initially easy to dismiss, until the air becomes thick and no one can breathe. Here at Riverside, the smoke began with Eleanor. Young, eager, maybe too eager. She whispered to a co-worker. I saw her slip something into her pocket. By the end of the shift, no one was sure what she'd seen. A napkin, a note, something worse. But the mental image stuck. Margaret, hand poised in motion. Next came the customers. Tyler Brooks, impatient and loud, let his distaste show in his words. She's slipping. Maybe she's not the saint we thought. Other voices joined. Regulars murmured Margaret didn't smile like she used to, or that she seemed distant, each observation slight. But together they painted a grim portrait. The air in Riverside grew heavy. Laughter faded. Conversations dropped to hushed tones. Eyes followed Margaret, seeking confirmation of the dread they already heard whispered. Simon tried to defend her, reminding the staff of her kindness, her patience, her years of steady service. But even his voice wavered, because Simon himself had seen the hesitation in her hands. His defense sounded less like certainty, more like desperate hope. Then it happened. The word slipped out. Thief. At first a joke behind a hand, then louder, without humor. The word coiled around Margaret's name like a predator, clinging with cruel insistence. Suspicion had taken root, and no explanation could easily uproot it. At the end of a shift, Victor called the staff together. The register drawer lay open like an injured wound. His voice, clipped and calculated, left no room for doubt. The till is short again, and once more the shortage fell during Margaret's shift. The words hit like stones. Nothing moved. Margaret stood frozen, face ashen. Victor's eyes swept the room, sharp, deliberate. "I have been patient," he said, each word precise. "This cannot continue." He didn't need to shout. His tone carried the weight of judgment. Then, almost carelessly, "You all know what happens if the police become involved." The threat slipped into the silence like ice in their veins. Margaret opened her mouth to speak and closed it. Her hands trembled at her sides. The woman known for steadiness now looked cornered, a bird sensing the net tightening around her. Simon shifted, ready to stand, but Victor's presence stilled him. Elena looked down, unable to meet Margaret's eyes. Nobody protested. The accusation carried weight because it came from the manager. Jackson watched in silence, torn. 10 years of loyalty shouldn't dissolve so easily, yet the evidence, or what passed for it, stacked higher each day. His jaw tightened. Owner and friend warred inside him, one demanding answers, one wanting to believe. Victor snapped the register closed, his verdict sealed. Jackson stayed long after the restaurant emptied, the hum of refrigerators the only sound left. Could it be true? Could Margaret, after a decade of flawless service, betray everything he'd built? He remembered the mornings she arrived early, how she greeted regulars by name, how children beamed when she bent with secret cookies. He remembered how she calmed that furious customer opening day, how she had steadied the staff when panic threatened to break them. Margaret was not careless. Margaret was not a thief. And yet the image that haunted him, the tired eyes, the hesitant hands, kept repeating in his mind, sharper with each repetition. He replayed that moment in his mind. Margaret standing over the register, lip pressed tight, shoulders slumped, as if every breath she drew carried a weight he couldn't name. Two truths vying for the same space pulled at him. The Margaret he had known and this trembling figure before him. "Rumors are smoke," he breathed, "and smoke conceals more than it reveals. I can't condemn her on smoke alone." His heart leaned toward belief in her innocence, clinging to memories of steadiness and warmth. Yet his role as owner demanded he seek clarity. He felt split, one side pleading trust, the other demanding answers. And then the decision crystallized, searing through doubt. If the bond of trust had fractured, he would not let others cast the verdict. He would step into her world, unseen, and bear witness himself. So the plan formed. He would don a disguise, craft a new identity. No longer Jackson, the authoritative owner. He would become Jim, a quiet, middle-aged kitchen hand, hungry for steady work. The moment that resolve settled into his bones, a strange calmness followed. Doubt no longer paralyzed him. Clarity propelled him forward, willing to pay any price for truth. The next morning, he left Jackson behind. He pulled on a worn uniform, 2 sizes too large, edges frayed, dignity folded into every seam. A cap hid his hair, and he slouched into unfamiliar posture. His voice emerged lower, softer, edged with the fatigue of someone used to following rather than leading. He walked in as Jim. Margaret was first to see him. Her practiced smile flickered, warm yet thinner than he remembered. "Welcome," she offered softly. "I hope you'll feel at home here." Jackson's chest tightened. Even under suspicion, she offered kindness. Elena waved briskly, her tone polite yet distant, as though she'd already accepted what people were saying. Simon's gaze lingered, curious, cautious, as though measuring whether this man belonged. And Victor, arriving last, nodded curtly. "Let's see if you can keep up," he muttered, before slipping past. Cold, dismissive, every syllable dangling authority above Jackson. Now, every gesture, every word, carried weight. He could no longer investigate from afar. He was inside Riverside's current, scrubbing counters, moving trays, letting the restaurant's rhythm absorb him. From the margins, he watched Margaret without the burden of suspicion. At first, she seemed exactly as she had always been, greeting patrons with that same opening melody of warmth, concealing tension behind a gentle smile. Then Tyler Brooks entered, impatient, restless, charging the room with his disdain. Margaret approached at her practiced pace. Minutes later, Tyler's voice pierced the hum. "This isn't my meal. It belongs to that table. 10 years and you can't tell a sandwich apart?" Silence collapsed over the diner. Margaret froze. Her face bloomed red. She stammered apology after apology, nearly dropping the plate in her rush to correct the mistake. The smile she forced afterward cracked, fragile as spun glass. Tyler sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some star employee." The contempt lingered, chilling. Jackson watched as realization hit him. This wasn't malice, not theft. It was fear, wearing her thin grasp of composure like a suit. Elena, passing with a tray, shook her head. Mixture of pity and unsettled accusation etched in her expression. Later, near the sink, she whispered to a colleague, "She's changed." Margaret passed. The word froze her. Her eyes drooped, grief surfacing where her composure once held firm. The shift slipped into silence. Margaret spoke less, shifted smaller. Simon caught Elena's expression and murmured, "Don't judge too quickly. One mistake doesn't erase a decade." But his voice wavered. Protective, yes, but strained, convinced more than convincing. Customers noticed shifts too. Glances followed Margaret, now laced with caution instead of comfort. Conversations iced mid-sentence as she passed. Jackson watched everything, the way Margaret's, shoulders hunched as if bracing against whispers, her grace fraying under the unseen weight of rumor. Each detail anchored in his mind. Murmurs wasn't at the edges anymore. They'd entered the heart of Riverside. And Margaret, once the center of warmth, looked achingly alone. Next shift brought Lady Marwick, the patron whose exacting standards she had met without fail for years. When the bill came, an item was missing, minor, seemingly inconsequential. But to Lady Marwick, this was fault. Her stare was razor-sharp. "This is not like you, Margaret." Glasses clinked, head strained to catch every syllable. Victor emerged as if summoned. Impeccable manners, but steel behind the apology. "My apologies, ma'am. This shouldn't have happened." He turned to Margaret, voice cold. "You are not the woman you used to be." Silence descended like a dam breaking. Margaret's lips quivered. She didn't reply. Fingers gripped apron's edge. The room's weight sank on her. Some looked with pity, others with judgment, all with watchful eyes. The public fracture was final. Jackson stood in the back, every muscle taut. He understood humiliation didn't just bruise, it could break. He wondered, fragile beneath the weight. How much longer could she endure? Later in the kitchen, he approached Elena, careful to speak as Jim the newcomer, not as Jackson the owner. Lightly. "Notice anything odd with Margaret?" Elena's hesitation said more than words. "She waits until Victor's gone before she goes near the register," she whispered. "It's like she's afraid, and she checks her phone constantly, like she's waiting for bad news." The confession trembled off her lips. Simon arrived, his face fractured on hearing. "Stop guessing," he cut in, voice firm. "Margaret isn't that kind of person." Elena shot back, voice tight. "You defend her too much. Open your eyes. People change." Tension crackled between them. In the middle stood Jim, listening, absorbing shards of loyalty and suspicion alike, feeling the fissures widening across a team once bonded by Margaret's own strength. For the first time, he saw how Margaret's struggle was unraveling more than her reputation. It was fraying the bonds that held the staff together. The burden she carried was no longer her own. It had seeped into the restaurant's very soul. Then the familiar clang of the register shattered the evening's subdued hum. Victor leaned over the drawer, counted painfully slow, lips drawn into a thin, steel line. When he finally straightened, his words cut through the air. "The drawer is short." His gaze swept across the room before settling on one figure, the woman behind the till. The room went still. Margaret stayed frozen, face ashen, as though the ground had shifted beneath her. Victor flicked a glance toward Jim. "Jackson, undercover. You've been working beside her. Did you notice anything?" Jackson kept his face blank, voice tremulous. I didn't see anything odd." Inside, his chest felt aflame. The thought of allowing her to stand, accused on slim whisper alone, burned him. But he could not yet reveal himself. Outside, the restaurant held its breath. 2 regulars slipped out into the night air, whispering, "Not the Margaret we used to know." The words drifted back like poisonous smoke. Simon stepped forward. His voice was gentle, offering reason. "Maybe the system made a mistake. These things can happen." Victor shut him down with a glare. "I am the manager here. I know what's happening, and this stops now." No space for doubt. No room for Margaret to defend herself. Her lips trembled. Sound died before it could form. Her silent collapse said more than words ever could. Jackson watched, fists clenched. A rumor had mutated to accusation. Accusation was bleeding into public spectacle, and still, he knew nothing. At day's end, after the last patron left, Margaret lingered at a corner table, the energy of the day weighing her small frame down. From her pocket, she retrieved a worn photograph of an older man. Kind eyes, creased smile, framed subtly by a hospital band. Her thumb traced his face as if his presence could soothe her soul. The soft buzz of her phone lit her face. Jackson crouched in the shadows by the door and glimpsed the glow. "Invoice due this week. Immediate payment required." The message was stark, but it broke something inside her. Her lips quivered. Tears spilled silently onto the photo. She crumpled the note, shoved it into her bag, and pressed palms to her face, trembling. This was no triumphant thief. It was a daughter crushed under the weight of hospital bills, her father's illness like an anchor across her chest. And yet, the shortages remained. Inside Jackson's mind, 2 words warred: thief versus victim. He wanted to believe in the latter, but his duty as owner demanded proof. Compassion and suspicion wrestled within him as he studied himself. His resolve hardened. The answer lay not in pity or assumption, but in the truth. He would pursue it. Not tonight, but soon. The following day's lunch rush reanimated Riverside's rhythm. Margaret slid through the motion, collecting orders from familiar faces, keeping pace, until Tyler Brooks stormed in. He sat rigid. Margaret approached with her pad, smile thin, but still in place. Minutes later, she returned with his meal, but no iced tea in sight. Tyler's impatience flared. 10 years here, he barked, and you still can't remember a simple drink? You shouldn't even be working here. The words echoed like a whip across the room. Heads lifted, remembering her past missteps. Margaret's face drained of color. I'm so sorry, she stammered, voice breaking, tears threatening. Her tray quivered. Victor materialized, voice sharp, cutting through only half empathy, half judgment. The customer is right. They pay for service, and they can demand better. The words landed like a verdict, and all attention fell upon Margaret. She sank inward, diminished by the weight of the room's scrutiny. Jackson observed in silence. This was no longer rumor or suspicion. It had become spectacle, ritual sacrifice. Margaret, once Riverside's beating heart, was now being offered up to public judgment, her dignity crushed beneath it. Later, as the lunch rush ebbed, Elena sought him out quietly. Voice hushed, conspiratorial. "Did you notice how she goes to the register?" she asked. He encouraged her to go on. "She waits until Victor's gone, always, like she's terrified of being seen, and she keeps checking her phone, like she's waiting for bad news." The confession drifted between them. Simon passed by and stopped, his posture tensed. "Stop talking like that," he snapped. "You think you know her? You don't. Margaret isn't that kind of person." Elena's arms crossed tight. "Wake up, Simon. Everyone's seeing it. Loyalty doesn't change facts." Their tension throbbed in the air. Simon's fierce defense colliding with Elena's sharp suspicion. Jackson stood between them, witness to both truth and hope. He did not intervene. Instead, he felt the fissure widen, the fracture within the team. The restaurant felt fragile, as though suspicion and loyalty had raised opposite flags, and Riverside itself was the battlefield. And Jackson, hidden in plain sight, realized clearly. Margaret's burden was no longer hers alone. It was unraveling the very fabric of what he had built. Once again, the memory of the register's clang echoed louder than the present. Victor leaned in, counting meticulously, face flat. Then he stood, eyes glassy, tone final. "The drawer is short," this time heavier. Then he punctuated it, even more so than before. Silence swallowed the room. Then sparks of whispers erupted. Elena's gaze flickered. Pity mingled with doubt. Simon stood rigid, jaw clenched, face white. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words jammed. Margaret was still, pale, silent, defeated. She looked less like a woman being accused, and more like an ice sculpture left unmanaged beneath the stairs, a figure frozen in the eyes of everyone she'd once served with warmth. Jackson watched, his heart drumming a fierce storm beneath the mask of Jim. This was the breaking point. Rumors had solidified into accusations. Suspicions had turned into evidence in Victor's hands. Margaret was cornered, whether by truth or falsehood. He tightened his fingers around the rag he held, its threadbare softness the only comfort in his grip. The truth hovered nearby, so near he could taste it, but remained hidden behind layers of pain and fear. What had just unfolded was not justice, it was dismantling, and unless he unearthed the real story, Margaret would not survive the next blow. During the next shift, he watched her not for efficiency, but for fragility. What he saw unsettled him more than any missing bill ever could. At every table, her hand drifted to her pocket, over and over, as if searching for something that anchored her to reality. When she glanced at her phone, the glow drained the color from her face. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her lips pressed firm as though holding back a sob. She stood frozen, tethered inside the message's embrace, until the clatter of a plate yanked her back to the present. She fled through the swinging kitchen door. Jackson followed just far enough to glimpse her leaning against a wall, chest heaving, one hand clutched tight to her apron. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though she might collapse, under a weight invisible to everyone but him. Then suddenly, she smoothed her cheeks with trembling movements, hurried, almost frantic, and returned to the floor with a smile stitched across her face. Brittle. Forced. The customers smiled back, oblivious, while Jackson noted the cracks behind her eyes. To most, she was still Margaret, the familiar warmth, the steady memory. But his disguise slipped aside. He saw the fatigue, the grief, the fear she could never admit. Every small detail was seared into his mind. The trembling fingers, the shallow breath, the hollow smile that no longer reached her eyes. These were not signs of criminal intent. They were the telltale marks of someone cornered by a storm she could not fight. Yet the puzzle wasn't solved. The money was still missing. The ledger remained short. Suspicion still pointed her way. Jackson's chest tightened further as one question echoed louder. Was she weakening under guilt or under grief? Either way, the truth inched closer. Mid-shift, Victor cornered her near the counter, his shadow a blade slicing through her composure. "Next time, Margaret," he hissed, voice low but icy. "I won't bother with warnings. I'll drag you to the police myself." His threat hovered between them, invisible but suffocating. Margaret's chin dropped toward her chest. Her eyes refused the world. She nodded. Once, twice. No words forming, her fingers twisting the apron's fabric in a silent plea. Elena listened, lips parted, mouth frozen in uncertainty. Fear pulled her eyes downward. Simon's jaw tightened, fists clenched at his sides, but Victor's hard glare froze him mid-rescue. His protest died before it could rise. Jackson, still Jim, watched the scene crack. Victor's words were no longer about mistakes. They were calculated persecution. Margaret shrank, disappearing further beneath the pressure. The phrase repeated in Jackson's mind. Something is wrong. This doesn't fit. But outwardly, his face remained steady. His role intact. He could not act yet. However, a seed had been planted, a certainty. This was more than weakness. It was manipulation. When the last staff left, Jackson stayed, pretending to tidy the back corner. Through the half-open break-room door, he saw Margaret alone, slumped on a worn couch, shoulders collapsed as though gravity itself crushed her. Her eyes shone but saw nothing, her gaze unfocused, yet filled with everything. In her hands, she held the same faded photograph of the kind-faced man wearing a hospital wristband. Her hold was fierce, knuckles white, as though the photo's survival depended on her grip. A tremor ran through her fingers. Then she let out a sob, quiet, raw. Tears began to fall freely, blurring the photograph's edges. Jackson wanted to step in, place a comforting hand on her shoulder, whisper she wasn't alone. But he stopped, hand gripping the doorframe. Not yet. This moment was delicate like glass. Too much force might push her away, sealing the truth even deeper. He told himself one word: patience. Patience would reveal more than pressure ever could. He leaned back into the shadows, absorbing every quiet sob, every tremor. The puzzle's pieces aligned closer. The shortages, the fear, the forced smiles, the tear-stained photograph. The truth circled nearer. He turned to leave, but a single thought reverberated inside him, steadier and more determined. The truth is near. Very near. The restaurant was silent now, lit only by the faint flicker of a neon bulb. Its glow etched Margaret's silhouette on the wall, thin, shaking, almost ghostly. She sat curled, photo pressed to her chest. Her lips moved in a whisper, meant only for the man in the image. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Her grip tightened. A tear traced its path down the photograph. She wiped it away reflexively, but more followed, unstoppable. The door sighed open. Jackson, still Jim, entered with careful ease, quiet as a breath. He sank into a chair a few steps away, maintaining the fragile silence between them. Time stretched. Margaret's breathing filled the air, uneven, ragged with grief. Jackson clasped his hands together, offering space rather than questions. Margaret lifted her head after a long pause. Her eyes were red, her cheeks stained. She caught his gaze and flinched, smearing away tears with the heel of her palm. "I'm just tired," she muttered, a half smile collapsing almost immediately. Her voice cracked, betraying the lie. Jackson merely nodded. "Not yet," his eyes seemed to say. Behind her trembling denial, he sensed it. Truth, urgent and ready to unfold. He spoke quietly, his tone gentle, caring. "I've worked in restaurants for a long time. I know exhaustion, that look, and I know grief. They're not the same." Silence pressed between them, dense and real. Margaret exhaled a sound, halfway between a laugh and a sigh, defeat and relief tangled in its tremor. She brushed off the moment with a half-hearted wave. "You read too much into things," she said, rising as if to close the chapter. Her hand smoothed the apron, her smile polished from habit, but her shoulders gave her away, trembling just enough to betray the weight she pretended wasn't there. Jackson hesitated, and when he tried, again, softer, he offered, "You don't have to tell me every detail, but if you ever need to share, I will listen." The words lingered there. Like an open hand, she refused. Margaret lifted her chin, but for a heartbeat, the mask cracked. Her lips quivered, eyes glistened, and she swallowed hard. Almost to herself, she whispered, "There's nothing." Then she turned away, ending the moment. But Jackson saw it all. The wall she had built was trembling. It would not hold forever. In the hush that followed, Jackson spoke again, voice quiet as falling rain. "Sometimes the greatest gift someone needs is someone willing to listen." Margaret stiffened, her hand pressing the table's edge, wood creaking under her grip. She held still, torn between silence and surrender, until the dam broke. Tears poured unbidden, faster than her hand could wipe them. Her breath hitched, fragmented, and her words tumbled out, jagged and desperate. "My father. He's dying." Each syllable fractured in the air, as if each held its own grief. "The doctors say it's cancer. Stage 4. The room narrowed. Sounds faded until only her confession remained. Jackson felt the weight of it settle onto his chest, dense and relentless. Margaret's gaze dropped to trembling hands clutching the photograph. "Every bill, every week," she stammered. "It's like another sentence. They don't care if I can't pay." Her words melted into sobs, her body shaking with the weight of unspoken nights. She pressed the photo to her heart, its edges damp and worn. "I'm drowning," she whispered, "and nobody even sees." Jackson remained silent, letting her voice fill the emptiness. The woman accused, the murmurers branded careless, was a daughter clinging to a father's life, and burdened by a debt no one else noticed. In that moment, the storm inside her was no longer invisible. It was painfully, undeniably present. And Jackson knew the truth had barely begun to surface. Her voice steadied just enough to continue, each word seeming to shred what remained of her composure. 3 months ago, they admitted him, and the doctors said there was no cure. The only option, treatment to buy time. She clutched the photograph tighter. The first bill, just the first, was more than I make in a year. She gasped, attempting to dry her tears, but they spilled anyway. I went from one place to another, office jobs, shops, cleaning. Each time they saw my age and shook their heads before I could even finish. She touched a strand of silvering hair, a bitter laugh escaping. Her gaze drifted, as though the rejection marks the walls themselves. Do you know what it feels like to walk out of opportunity after opportunity? To hear the same excuses? It's not your skills, they whispered. It's the years behind you. Her voice cracked. Riverside was the only place that still needed me, where no one questioned me. She inhaled, struggling to keep composure. Words surged onward. So I smiled, worked harder, trained speed and memory into myself. Maybe then I could hide the storm inside. Her face crumpled. But every day the numbers grow. Every night I feel smaller, like I'm losing, despite trying everything. She lifted tear-red eyes to Jackson. I don't have a way out. Jackson reached meagerly forward, voice a whisper. But the register, the missing money, everyone's pointing to you. Margaret's body shook violently. She pressed trembling hands over her face. When she spoke, it was raw, bone-deep sorrow. Victor! His name broke out of her. Jackson's heart lurched. Victor Rains, his mind, disbelief colliding with dawning clarity. Margaret lowered her hand slowly, eyes haunted. It was him. I caught him. Her voice broke but forced forward the truth. It started with the tips. Her lip quivered as she recalled. The tip jar always light, but he kept the books pristine. Then one night, I saw it. His hand in the jar. She swallowed. I wanted to come straight to you. But he found me. Smiled cold and warned. Open your mouth and you're done. No job, no paycheck, nothing. Jackson's jaw tightened, fury simmering beneath calm. She pressed on. He said if money ever went missing, he'd frame it on me. That my mistakes, my age, my exhaustion would look like guilt. If I resisted, he'd tell the police. Her breath hitched. I wasn't stealing, Jackson. I was surviving. Surviving a man who knew exactly how to break me. And he still is. Her revelation shattered the air. The story everyone believed was crumbling beneath the weight of truth. Jackson saw the shape of reality emerging. Margaret was not the betrayer. She was the betrayed. Her hands shook as she spoke the final pieces. He handed me this, she said, voice breaking. A brown envelope, full of cash. Consider it your share, he whispered. I spat it back at him. He smirked and said, whether you take it or not, they'll think you did. Jackson's fists clenched tight. She continued, he forged my handwriting into ledgers, slipped pages in. Fingerprints are on everything, he said. Margaret pressed the photo tight. I was branded, she whispered. Even if I screamed the truth, the ledger would lie for him. Her shoulders shook with each syllable. He said, you bleed with me. If he goes down, you go first. The air sank. Jackson's breathing roared in silence. His pursuit of betrayal ended here. He stood to protect Margaret. Her sobs turned ragged, voice raw with guilt. I know staying silent was wrong, but my father, he needs me. I had no choice. Jackson watched, torn between rage and sorrow, until he rose and removed his ragged cap. Straightening, resolute, and real. You don't have to be afraid, he said, voice steady. Margaret's sobs stilled. Her tear-streaked eyes locked on him, confusion brimming. What do you mean? She whispered. Jackson met her gaze, firm. I am not Jim. I am Jackson. The room held its breath. Her eyes widened, disbelief swelling. She shook her head. No, it can't be. But Jackson's stare was unwavering. Yes, it's me. I needed to see the truth. And now I do. Margaret stood frozen between fear and relief. The disguise dropped between them. The owner and the servant, stripped of titles, stood face to face. The air throbbed with raw revelation. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Dear God, it was you all this time. Then, it's over now. I'll lose everything. Jackson stepped forward, tone anchoring. No, he said firmly. You will not lose your place here. You were wronged. Tears raced down her cheeks. You must hate me. I let him drag me into this. Jackson placed a steady hand on her shoulder. Not judgment, but strength. I don't hate you. I believe you, and I will protect you. The guilty man is Victor. Her lips trembled. After everything, you still believe me? He nodded. Yes. From this moment, I will protect you. His voice resonated like forged iron. Promise and shield. Margaret pressed her hands to her mouth. For weeks, her world had been shadow. But in that moment, for the first time, something broke through. The terror lingered, but beneath it, hope began its fragile beat. Silence filled the air. Margaret's breaths staggered. Jackson's gaze constant and unwavering. She lifted tear-rimmed eyes, the glimmer of hope faint but unmistakable. The kind that ignites when all seems lost. Jackson whispered, steady and sure, tomorrow, the truth will stand in the open. No more shadows, no more lies. Margaret parted lips, voice barely a whisper. I still can't believe someone would stand beside me. She held the photo tight. Jackson's reply was unwavering. You will never walk alone again. Victor's hold ends here. I promise you that. He stood tall, shoulders set with resolve, and the small room pulsed with the beginning of light. The faint hum of the overhead fluorescent light seemed to fade, leaving only the weight of his vow resonating in her ears. Margaret clutched the photograph tighter, fingers trembling, and for the first time in weeks, her lips curved into something more than a practiced smile. Not radiant, but fragile, weary and precious. The smile of someone who dared to believe again. No words followed. None were needed. In that silence, an unspoken pact was forged. Tonight was only a pause. What awaited them would not be peace. It would be battle. Dawn would bring a war, and as the stillness held them, both knew it. Morning broke heavy. The staff room was packed, but voice levels never rose above a hum, cloaked in unease. Glances darted, hearts tapped louder than the ticking clock. Then Victor strode in, sharp, triumphant. He planted himself at the room's front, gazing across the assembly with a glare directed at Margaret, as though the space already belonged to him. Margaret sat hunched at the back, fingers entangled, her frame quivering. Lena leaned in, whispering, "This can't be good. Something big is coming." The suggestion rippled fear. Simon stood arms crossed, face rigid, eyes flicking toward Jim, the plain-clothed Jackson. Yet behind Jackson's calm facade, a fire glowed quietly, something different stirring. Before Victor could speak, Jackson stepped forward. His footsteps carved attention through the hush. One by one he shed the disguise, the cap, gruff voice, slouched walk, peeling back layers until he stood tall, unmistakably himself. "Enough," he said, voice steel slicing through the tension. The room froze. Gasps and whispered realization filled the air. "It's Mr. Jackson." Margaret's eyes widened. Elena clapped a hand over her mouth. Simon staggered. Victor's smirk flickered, returned. Yet the damage was done. The mask had fallen. The owner stood revealed, and the confrontation was primed. Jackson's voice rolled steady, commanding. "I've heard whispers, fragments of half-truths. Today, show me the truth." His gaze locked onto Victor, unwavering. Victor laughed, dry, contemptuous. "You dare? Look no further than your precious waitress." He jabbed a finger at Margaret. "Orders flawed, customers upset, register short, always her fault. She's your weak link." Margaret's shoulders collapsed. She bowed her head, eyes glistening with silent surrender. The room erupted in murmurs, suspicion fanned like flames. Elena bit her lip. Simon clenched his fists, but said nothing. Victor's voice rose. Missing money, nervous behavior, sneaking around. Look at her. Deny it if you can. The hush that followed drowned louder than his words. The silence of faith crumbling. Jackson remained still, unmoving. His silence crackled with tension. Then, taking a breath, he drew a thick folder of documents. I've reviewed records, compared handwritten logs to our master system that cannot be altered. He held the papers up for all to see. Discrepancies appeared only during one man's shifts. Victor Raines. Silence fell. Elena's jaw dropped. No, that's impossible. Her voice cracked on the edge of disbelief. Simon stepped forward, eyes fierce. I knew something was wrong. Margaret couldn't have done this. Vindication colored his voice. Victor's face turned pale. His confident armor cracked. That must be a mistake, a calculation error. Jackson's voice dropped, heavy. Mistakes don't vanish entire sums. Mistakes don't land in your pocket while our staff is shamed under suspicion. The statement rang through the room like a hammer blow. Staff murmurs shifted, shock giving way to outrage. Helena's narrowed eyes became fire. Margaret dared to lift her head, a spark shimmering in her weary eyes. Jackson slammed the folder onto the table. This isn't negligence. It's betrayal. Of me, the restaurant, and the people who trusted you. The tide turned at last. Victor was cornered, visible to all. A tremulous voice broke free. I once saw him take from the tip jar. Elena stepped forward, trembling but resolute. Her words pulled the lid off buried truth. Simon followed her lead. I suspected him for months. I kept quiet because he was manager. His shame burned, but his conviction rang true. Others spoke too. Some whispered, others louder. I noticed too, they said. He was always the last at the register. The whispers grew into a roar of truth. Victor snapped, "Shut up, all of you!" His rage tumbled out raw, but it sputtered, hollow. Margaret gathered herself and stood, voice quiet but firm. He threatened me. The words cut like steel. Silence seized the room. Victor's projection of authority unraveled before the staff's united truth. For the first time, he had nothing left to say. His defensiveness erupted. Lies! She's the thief, not me! His finger jabbed wildly. The room, however, no longer believed. With desperation, he stormed toward the exit. But Jackson blocked him. No one leaves until the truth is finished, he said, voice resolute as a rock. Jackson pulled out his phone. Few words later, distant sirens rose, drawing nearer. Victor spun, screaming threats. Slander, you'll regret this. His voice rang shrill, but powerless. When the officers arrived, calm and purposeful, they arrested Victor. His fury turned impotent as he was led past rows of silent, judgmental colleagues. Some faces flashed satisfaction, others let go of fear. Margaret sat, tears of release cascading. Not shame. Simon's gentle hand on her shoulder spoke solidarity. Eleanor lowered eyes, regret giving way to relief. Jackson stood steady, anchor in the storm. Riverside had exhaled. Justice walked in. Injustice walked out in handcuffs. Jackson fixed his gaze on Margaret. You are not guilty. The real offender already paid the price. Her body sagged, finally accepting truth. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, "Thank you. Thank you." Elena knelt beside her. "We were wrong. I'm so sorry." Simon stood close, soft smile, wordless loyalty in his posture. Others circled in, transforming whispers of doubt into warm affirmations. Margaret cried openly, but in her tears a fragile, real smile bloomed. The exhaustion etched on her face softened. Her shoulders, once bowed by dread, began to rise. The room itself seemed to loosen its tension and pulse with warmth again. Jackson watched, heart full of both pride and sorrow. He had witnessed how truth nearly drowned, but now Margaret stood restored, not as an accused, but as Riverside's soul. Around her, the staff didn't whisper theft anymore. They whispered of care, of home. Days later, their hearts still echoing the storm past, the staff gathered. Jackson stood before them, no disguise, no distance, voice calm and firm. I've decided something. Margaret's father will not face this fight alone. I will support his treatment personally. The room gasped, disbelief melting into awe. Margaret covered her mouth, tears flooding anew. Jackson continued, and from now on, tips will be collected and recorded with complete transparency. Every cent belongs to those who earned it, and I will ensure it's never stolen again. Applause erupted, a release of trust rebuilt, Margaret's gratitude barely voiced. I don't know what to say. Jackson stepped forward gently. You don't have to say anything. Family doesn't abandon family. The words spread through the room like sunlight breaking clouds. Her face buried in her hands, Margaret sobbed. Tears of joy and belonging. Colleagues stood, gathering around her. Elena, Simon, others, wrapping her in embrace. She was no longer a target. She was the heart of Riverside again, cherished, alive, hopeful. The restaurant breathed lighter, as though walls made of mistrust had opened to welcome belonging. A week later, Riverside felt different, not the paint or decor, but in spirit. Regulars had quietly organized a gesture of love. Mrs. Holloway entered first, clutching sun-bright flowers. 10 years, not one drink wrong, she said gently. You deserve more than thanks. Margaret inhaled their scent, eyes glistening. The Whitfords, 3 generations strong, followed, wrapping her in warm embraces. We came for you, not just the food, Mr. Whitford whispered. Children squealed when Margaret handed out her signature smiley cookies from behind the counter. Laughter, the real kind, filled the air. Elena grinned. You're back. And Simon teased, just don't yell at me when I drop a tray. The room laughed. Margaret's laughter came in tears, proof that joy had returned. There were no orchestrated speeches, just warmth, connection, belonging. Margaret stood at the center, flowers in one hand, cookies in the other, radiant in the glow of forgiveness. Night settled gently over Riverside. Jackson watched from the rear, speaking softly, more to himself than her. A business isn't powered by profit alone. It needs a heart. Margaret looked up, eyes shining. Thank you for believing in me. It was more than gratitude. It was rebirth. Her smile brightened, as though past cracks never existed. Outside, children's laughter floated through dusk. The world beyond held shadows, but inside these walls, light endured. And then, like a quiet voice carried on the breeze, came the silent, echoing question in every heart. When you witness injustice, will you stand or stay silent? It waited, lingering in breaths, in trust restored, in every soul that would not let truth be buried again.